Chapter 9 of Living Alone by Stella Benson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The House of Living Alone moves away. When Sarah Brown and Richard, followed by the dog David, reached the Mitten Island ferry, after travelling slowly by moonlight, they were surprised to see a great crowd of people banked up on the island, and one man in the uniform of a policeman standing alone on the mainland. About 10 yards from land, the ferryman sat in his boat, rowing gently to keep himself stationary in the current. "You'll have to come to shore now," said the policeman, in the tone of one exhausted by long argument. "Here's some more parties wanting to cross." He turned to Richard. "Look here, mate," he said. "I'm here in the discharge of my duty, and this ferryman is obstructing me." "Dear," said Richard. The ferryman said, "If the King of England, why, if the two ghosts of Queen Victoria and Albert the Good was waiting to cross now, I wouldn't come in for them, not if it was going to give you a chance to set foot on Mitten Island." The crowd across the river, divining that a climax of defiance was being reached, shouted, "Ya! Ya!" in unison. "Is either of you parties an householder on Mitten Island?" asked the policeman of Sarah Brown and Richard. "I am," said Richard, to his companion's surprise. "Can you give me any information regarding the whereabouts of a character known under any of these names? Iris Hyde, T.B. Watkins, Angela the Witch, possibly a male in female disguise, believed to conduct a general shop and boarding house on Mitten Island." "There is only one shop on Mitten Island," said Richard, "and one boarding house, all in one. I own it. I can recite you the prospectus if you like. I have a superintendent there. I have known her all my life. I did not know she was believed to be a male in female disguise. I did not know she had any name at all, let alone half a dozen." The policeman seemed to be troubled all the time by mosquitoes. He slapped his face and his ears and the back of his neck. He succeeded in killing one insect upon the bridge of his nose, and left it there by mistake, a strangely ignoble corpse. Sarah Brown suspected Richard of some responsibility for this untimely persecution. "That party is charged with an offence against the Defence of the Realm Act," said the policeman, "with being, although a civilian, in possession of a flying machine, and, obstructing His Majesty's enemies in the performance of their duty." "Oh dear," said Richard. "Dear." "Do either of you know the present whereabouts of the party?" persisted the policeman. Attacked on every side by insects, he was becoming rather pathetic in his discomfort and indignity. His small eyes, set in red fat, stared with uncomprehending protest. His fat, busy hands were not agile enough to defend him. He felt unsuccessful and foolish, and very near the ground. He wished quite disproportionately to be at home with his admiring wife in Acton. Sarah Brown shook her head in reply, and Richard could say nothing but, "Oh dear." "May I take your name and home address and regimental number, please, young man?" said the policeman, after a baffled pause. "Now my address," said Richard with genuine shame, "is a thing I honestly never can remember. I know I've heard it. I've tried and tried to learn it at my mother's knee. It begins with an H, I think. That's the worst of not being able to read or write. I can describe the place to you exactly. A house with a lot of windows that sees a long way. If you turn your back on the Marble Arch, and go on till you get to a big poster saying 'Eat less meat,' and then turn to your right," pointing to the left, "or again if you go by air as the crow flies, or rather as the witch flies." "You shall hear of this foolery, my fine fella," said the distressed policeman, almost with a break in his voice. "Seeing as how you refuse information, and this ferryman sees fit to defy the law, I have no course open but to whistle for my mate, and leave him here while I telephone for a police boat." He raised his whistle to his lips, but before he could blow it, the climax of this, the least successful evening of his life, overwhelmed him. A shadow swept over the party, a large flying substance caught him full on the back of the neck, and knocked him off the landing stage into the river. The witch, on Harold her broomstick, landed on the spot vacated by the policeman. "Oh, look what I've done! Look what I've done!" she exclaimed, in an ecstasy of vexation. There was no need to tell anybody to look. 500-odd people were already doing so with enthusiasm. "Oh, what a dreadfully bad landing! Oh, Harold, how could you be so careless?" She took the cringing Harold by the mane and slapped him violently once or twice. Richard stretched out his riding crop to the splashing policeman, murmuring, "Oh dear, dear." "Don't be frightened," said the witch to the policeman. "We'll soon get you out, and the water's so shallow you can't sink. Talking of sinking, Richard, there's a question that puzzles me rather. If a rat got into a submarine, how would it behave? A submarine, you see, is a sinking ship, and rats pride themselves so on knowing when to—" Sarah Brown seized the witch by the shoulder. "Go away, witch," she said. "How do you mean, go away?" asked the witch. "I've only just this minute come." "Go away, go away," was all that Sarah Brown could manage to repeat. "Oh, very well," said the witch in her offended grown-up voice. "I can take a hint, I suppose, as well as anybody. I'm going." She seated herself with an irritable flouncing movement on Harold's saddle and flew away. The policeman climbed out of the water, looking like an enraged seal. Peals of laughter from the other side of the moonlit river robbed him of adequate words. "Not so fast, my fine fella," he roared, seeing Richard kissing the horse Vivian on the nose, preparatory to riding away. "Don't you think for a minute I don't know who's at the bottom of this." "You don't know how tired I am of loud noises," said Richard, lifting one foot with dignity to the stirrup. "You don't know how bitterly I long to be still and hear things very far off, but always there is an angry voice or the angry noise of guns in the way." He twined one finger negligently into the mane on the horse Vivian's neck and pulled himself slowly into the saddle. The policeman stood mysteriously impotent. Water dripped loudly from his clothes and punctuated Richard's quiet speech. "Dear policeman," continued Richard, "I believe you have talked so much tonight that you haven't heard what a quiet night it is. You are smaller than a star, and yet you make more noise than all the stars together. You are not so cold as the moon, and yet your teeth chatter more loudly than hers. The heat of your wrath is less than the heat of the sun, and yet while he is silent and departed, you fill the air with clamour, and, if I may say so, seem to be outstaying your welcome. Oh, dear policeman, listen. Do you know, if there were no London on this side, and no war on that, the silence would be deep enough to fill all the seas of all the worlds." He shook the reins, and the horse Vivian moved, treading quietly on the strip of grass that borders the path to the ferry. "I am going to talk to my true love now," said Richard, his voice fading away as he rode. "My true love's voice is the only voice that is a little more beautiful to me than silence." For a moment he looked every inch a wizard. Every button on his uniform and every buckle on the horse Vivian's harness caught the moonlight and changed into fairy spangles as he turned and waved his hand before disappearing. The policeman seemed quieted as he looked at Sarah Brown sitting white and haggard with pain on the river-bank, with her arm around the shivering David. In a minute, my one," she was saying to David. "We are nearly home now. We shall soon be quiet now." There was always something startlingly inoffensive about Sarah Brown's appearance.
"I'd like to know who was responsible for this outrage all the same,"
said the policeman. Sarah Brown did not hear him, but she said, "Oh, I am so very sorry it happened. It was a pure accident, of course, but it is so terrible to see anyone have an accident to his dignity. You must forget it quickly. You must run and find someone who knows you at your best. You must tell her a fine revised version of the incident, and then you will feel better." The ferryman shouted,
"I don't mind coming in now to fetch this young woman. You can come too now, if you like, Mr. Pompous-in-the-Pond, for the party you're looking for is not at home, and I've no doubt but what the crowd over there will give you a gay welcome." "I'll look into the matter tomorrow," said the policeman. "You haven't heard the last of this, none of you haven't, not by a long chalk. I've a good mind to get the mayor to read the riot act at you."
As Sarah Brown landed on Mitten Island, she could not distinguish the faces of the waiting crowd, but she heard sharp, anxious voices. "They ain't going to get her, not if I knows it," She never speaks but kindness, the dear lamb. She's more of a saint than any in the calendar.
She gave my Danny a room in her house and put art into him after he lost his sight in the war.
She's the good fairy of the island.
She grew them sweet williams in my garden one night when I first come here and was homesick for Devon.
The law's always after saints and fairies, always has been.
But the law can't catch her.
The law has driven her away, said Sarah Brown. There is no magic now on Mitten Island. She staggered through the open door of the shop. This is Richard's house, she said to herself as she entered, and felt doubly alone, because Richard was far away, riding to his true love. She struck her last match, lit the lantern, and looked round. There was no sound in the house of living alone. She thought there would never again be any magic sound there to penetrate to her imprisoned hearing. The aprons hanging from the ceiling near the door flapped in the cold wind, and she thought they were like grey bats in a cave. The breeze blew out the open lantern. Ah, how desolate, how desolate! A piece of paper was impaled upon the counter by means of a headless hatpin. There was something very largely and badly written on it. Sarah Brown read, "Well, Soup, it looks like my night's come, and what do you think? Sherry's come too. Him and me has gone off to a place he knows that's a fine place for such a boy as Elbert to be born in, so no more at present from your true Peony." Sarah Brown climbed up the short stairway, painful step by painful step, to her cell. She sat on her bed holding her throbbing side and breathing with fearful caution. She looked at the empty grate. She put a cigarette in her mouth, the unconscious and futile answer of the dweller alone to that blind hunger for comfort. But she had no matches, and presently, dimly conscious that her groping for comfort had lacked result, she absently put another cigarette into her mouth, and then felt a fool. She stared at the cold window. The sky seemed to be nailed carelessly to it by means of a crooked star or two. These are the terrible nights of living alone, when you have fever, and sometimes think that your beloved stands in the doorway to bring you comfort, and sometimes think that you have no beloved, and that there is no one left in all the world, no word, no warmth, nor ever a kindly candle to be lighted in that spotted darkness that walls up your hot sight. Again, on those nights you dream that you have already done those genial things your body cries for, or perhaps that other has done them. The fire is built and alight at last. A cup of something cool and beautifully sour stands ready to your hand. You can hear the delicious rattle of china on a tray in the passage, someone coming with food you would love to look at, and presently perhaps to eat, when you feel better. But again and again your eyes open on the cold, dumb darkness, and there is nothing but the wind and strange sinister emptiness creaking on the stair. These are the terrible nights of living alone. Yet no real lover of that house and of that state would ever exchange one of those haunted and desert nights for a night spent watched in soft warm places. Sarah Brown was not long left alone that night to look at the strip of moonlight on the cold ashes of her fireplace. The shop below shook suddenly with many footfalls, and the metallic officious barking of the dog David rent the still air of her cell. A man's voice at the foot of the stairs said, "I can hear a dog barking," and a woman's voice followed it. "Angela, dear, is that you?" Sarah Brown was only aware of a vague and irksome disturbance. She groped to her door, opened it, and shouted miserably, "Go away, policeman, go away! She is not here!" Lady Arabel came up, flashing an electric torch. "My dear, you look dreadfully ill. Why, look, you are trembling. Why, look, your little dog is making your counterpane muddy. Don't be afraid for Angela. We are all here to try and help her." "All here?" "Yes, Meta and the Mayor and Mr. Turvey and Mr. Frere. Let me help you into bed, and then you shall tell me what you know of her. You have had a dreadfully trying time." "I am well," said Sarah Brown ungraciously. "You are none of you going to help the witch without me." "Ah, this is all very dreadful," sighed Lady Arabel.
Most foolish of us to come here all together like this, after the policeman took our names and addresses and was dreadfully impertinent and suspicious. But Meta insisted. I quite expect to spend the next 24 hours in jail, or else to be shot for offence of the realm. In fact, speaking as a ratepayer, I think the police ought to have done it before. Still, Meta thought we might perhaps be able to help Angela. Meta has so many friends who seem influential, but so talkative, my dear.
She led the way downstairs. Mr. Tovey and the mayor were talking at the foot of the stairs. Mr. Frere was listening sardonically. As Sarah Brown went past them into the shop, she smelt the unflower-like scent that always denoted the presence of Miss Ford. Sarah Brown herself was accompanied by nothing more seductive than a faint smell of gasoline, showing that her clothes had lately been home-cleaned. In the darkness of the shop, she saw Miss Ford stooping, trying to shut the big difficult drawer in which the witch kept her magic. "It is frightfully explosive," said Sarah Brown. Miss Ford started and straightened her back.
"Ah, Miss Brown, I was just looking about."
Sarah Brown sat gasping on the counter, and the rest of the party re-entered the shop, bringing the lantern.
"How very absurd all this is," said Miss Ford nervously. "Taking such a great deal of trouble about a necessitous case." "America is in my mind," said Lady Arabel. "If we could get her there. Anybody who has done anything silly goes to America. Indeed, if I remember rightly, America is entirely populated with fugitives from somewhere else. So dreadfully confusing for the Red Indians. They say the story of the Tower of Babel was only a prophecy about the Woolworth building."
"You couldn't get a passport," said Mr. Darnby Frere, who was the only person present really conscious of sanity. "Only a miracle could produce a passport in these days, especially for a fugitive from justice." "Only a miracle, or magic," said Sarah Brown. Miss Ford moved instinctively behind the counter towards the open drawer full of ingredients for happiness. "We must remember," added Mr. Frere, "that after all she did break the law. In fact, I cannot for the life of me imagine why on earth we are all—"
"Oh, Darnby, do be sensible," said Miss Ford. "Of course we know it is wrong to break the law, but in this case, well, I myself should be the last to blame her."
"No, not the last," said Sarah Brown.
"What do you mean?"
"Certainly not the last. Probably not even the penultimate one. You flatter yourself."
"Why, surely some of you ladies, moving in the highest circles, knows of gentlemen in the Foreign Office that would do a little shut-eye job for old times' sake," suggested the mayor. This was a challenge to Miss Ford. She ceased to gaze haughtily on Sarah Brown. "Men from 3 departments of the Foreign Office are fairly regular Wednesday friends of mine," she said. "But I could hardly trouble any of them on so trivial a matter."
There was silence, while Miss Ford toyed gingerly with one of the paper packets out of the witch's drawer. Presently she said,
"What about Richard?"
Lady Arabel showed sudden irritation.
"There you go again, Meta. I have spoken to you of it again and again. It's Richard this and Richard that whenever anything in the least tiresome or out of the way happens. One would think you considered the poor boy a wizard." "You needn't lose your temper, Arabel," said Miss Ford coldly. "I only meant that Richard might be useful, having so many friends and such skill in chemistry."
As if unconsciously, she tore off one corner of the packet of magic she held, before adding,
"And besides, as I have often told you, I believe Richard to have real occult power, which would give him a special interest in this case."
Sarah Brown, who was burying her face in her hands and missing much of the conversation, caught the name of Richard, and said, "Richard has gone to his true love." A tempest of restrained embarrassment arose.
"She's feverish," murmured Miss Ford, turning scarlet. "My dear Sarah," said Lady Arabel tartly, "you are quite mistaken, and I must beg of you to be careful how you repeat idle gossip about my son. Richard is at his office. You know it is only open at night, one of Richard's quaint fancies." "I will ring up his office," said Miss Ford, deciding to ignore Sarah Brown both now and in future. "Where is the telephone?"
"There is none," replied Sarah Brown. "This is the house of living alone." Miss Ford was pouring a grain or two of the magic into her palm.
"How very credulous people are," she said, with a self-conscious smile. If Thelma Bennett Watkins were here, she would credit this powder with—" She stopped, for an astonishing sharp smell filled the shop. Almost immediately a curious wheezy sound, punctuated by taps, proceeded from the corner. It was Mr. Bernard Tovey trying to sing "Mon cœur s'ouvre à ta voix," and beating time by swinging his heels against the counter on which he sat. Sarah Brown felt suddenly well. She trembled, but was well. She jumped off the counter. "I will run across if you like," she said, "and ring up Richard from the ferryman's house. He may have left his true love now. I'm not deaf on the telephone, and the ferryman won't admit strangers." As she left, the smell of magic was getting stronger and stronger. Mr. Tovey, still impersonating Delilah in the corner, was approaching the more excitable passages of the song. Miss Ford was saying, "Really, Bernard?" Sarah Brown felt a slight misgiving. A warm and rather dramatic-looking light was shining behind the red curtain of the ferryman's lattice window as Sarah Brown crossed the moonlit road. She delighted, after her recent black hours, to think of all those people in the world who were sitting stuffily and pleasantly in little ugly rooms that they loved, doing quiet, careful things that pleased them. And she told herself that the thought of Richard's little office, alone and alight in the deserted city every night, would comfort her often in the darkness. The ferryman opened his door and invited her genially to his telephone. He had been sitting at his table, surrounded by the snakes that for him took the place of a family. On the table was a bowl of milk from which a large bull snake, in a gay Turkey carpet design, was drinking. A yellow and black python lay coiled in several figures of 8 in the armchair, and an intelligent-looking small dust-coloured snake with a broad nose and an active tongue leaned out of the ferryman's breast pocket. "Aren't they beautiful?" he said, with shy and paternal pride, as Sarah Brown tried to find a place on which the python would like to be tickled or scratched. Somehow the python has a barren figure from a caresser's point of view. The ferryman went on. "There is something about the grip and spring in a snake's body that makes me feel giddy with pleasure. Snakes to me, you know, are just a drug, sold by the yard instead of in bottles. My brain is getting every day colder and quieter, and all through loving snakes so." Sarah Brown rang up Richard's office, and the over-refined voice of a young gentleman clerk answered her. Mr. Higgins was not in the office. Mr. Higgins had left particular word that if anyone wanted him, they were to be told that he had, gone to his true love. But any minor business matter connected with magic could be attended to in his absence. Mr. Higgins spending so much of his time on the battlefield at present, a good deal of the routine work had to be done in any case by the speaker, his confidential clerk. Passports to America? Perfectly simple. The office had simply to issue blank sheets treated in a certain way, and every official to whom the sheet should be presented would read upon it what he would want. But Mr. Higgins would have to affix his mark and seal. Mr. Higgins would be in the office some time tonight, probably within the hour. How many passports? 2, said Sarah Brown. 1 for my friend and 1 for me. A dog doesn't need one, does he? A British dog? I will book the berths tomorrow. I can pawn or rather, I can sell my war loan. As she hung up the receiver, the ferryman asked, "Are you having a party up at the shop in the superintendent's absence?" "Not intentionally," replied Sarah Brown. "Why?" "Well, I just wondered. There's a noise like 1,000 mad gramophones playing backwards coming from there." Sarah Brown's misgivings returned like a clap of thunder. She rushed back to the shop. The lantern was standing in the middle of the floor, its glass was shattered, and out of each of its 8 panels streamed a great flame 6 or 7 feet high, like the petal of an enormous flower. Facing these flames stood Miss Ford and Mr. Tovey, hand in hand, each singing a different song very earnestly. Lady Arabel had found somewhere a patent fire extinguisher, and was putting on her glasses in order to read the directions. Mr. Frere was hesitating in the background with a leaking biscuit tin full of water. The mayor was gone. "Great Scott!" said Sarah Brown. "You'll burn the place down. Look at that row of petticoats up there catching fire already. What have you done with the mayor?" "We made him invisible by mistake," whispered Mr. Tovey.
"But shh, he doesn't know it yet."
"Nothing matters," said Miss Ford. "We are all going to America." And she continued her song, which was an extempore one about the sea.
"But that's no reason why you should burn the house down," said Sarah Brown.
"That's what I thought," agreed Mr. Frere. "But water won't put out that flame."
The singers fell silent. Only the voice of the invisible mayor could be heard singing, if those lips could only speak, in a loud tremulous voice, to the accompaniment of his own unseen stamping feet. "You've been putting magic into that flame," said Sarah Brown distractedly. "I told you it was dangerous. Nothing will put magic out except more magic. What will the witch say?"
"It doesn't matter what anybody says," said Miss Ford. "We are all going to America. No place and no person matters when I am not there. There are no places and no people existing where I am not. I have suspected it before, and now I am sure that everything is all a pretence except me. Look how easy it was to dismiss that gross grocer from sight. He was just a bit of background. I have painted him out."
The drapery department on the ceiling was ablaze now, and flakes of ashy petticoat and the metal frames of buttons showered to the floor. "I will go and get help," said Sarah Brown, and hurried out of doors, followed feverishly by David, who was not a very brave dog in moments of crisis, and yet liked to appear busy and helpful. It was to the ferryman's telephone that they returned. Sarah Brown knew that the fire was a magic fire, and that an appeal to the LCC Fire Brigade would only bring defeat and unnecessary bewilderment upon a deserving organisation. Sarah Brown rang up Richard's office, and Richard, who had a heroic and almost cinematic gift for being on hand at the right moments, answered her himself. "Come at once," said Sarah Brown. "The House of Living Alone is on fire. Someone has been tampering with the magic drawer."
"Oh dear, dear," said Richard. "And this is such a busy night at the office too. Do you think it is really important? It is my house, you know."
"Well, I don't see what is to prevent Mitten Island from being burnt to the water's edge. In fact, I don't see why, being a magic fire, it should stop at the water's edge. Not to mention that the mayor—"
"Very well, I'll come," said Richard.
As she stepped out of the door, he arrived.
"I came by flash of lightning," he explained, smoothing his hair and readjusting his Bill Sykes service cap in the manner of one who has moved swiftly. "The lightning service is getting very bad. I was held up for quite 3/4 of a second over Whitehall. There was some wireless war news coming in, and the lightning had to let it pass. Now, what's all this fuss about, Sarah Brown?"
There was a crowd of delirious Mitten Islanders round the House of Living Alone. While Sarah Brown and Richard were about 50 yards away, a many-forked and enormous white flame suddenly wrapped the house about, like a hand clutching and crushing it.
"The faggots round the stake are lighted," said Richard, "but the witch has fled."
It seemed that the stars were devoured by the flame, so far did it outshine them. The flame shrank in upon itself and collapsed. There was no more House of Living Alone. "Oh, Richard," said Sarah Brown. "Your mother and Miss Ford and—"
"Was mother in there?" asked Richard placidly. "Wonders will never cease. Well, well, it is fortunate that no magic of any sort could ever touch mother."
And indeed, as they pushed through the crowd, they saw all the recent occupants of the shop arguing at the front gate.
"I didn't blow it," Mr. Tovey was saying in an aggrieved voice. "I was singing, not blowing." "Well, all I know is that while you were on that high note something seemed to scatter the flames, and the drawer full of explosives caught fire," said Mr. Darnby Frere aggressively, flourishing his empty biscuit tin. "It doesn't matter," said Miss Ford calmly. "We are all going across the sea tomorrow."
She roused herself a little, and said to Mr. Frere with a smile,
"You know, I inherit the sea tradition. My father commanded HMS Indigestible in '84.
"I wonder what put out the flames so suddenly?" asked Mr. Tovey, who was still dreamily beating time to imaginary music with one hand.
"I put it out," said Richard.
"I wonder whose house it is," added Mr. Tovey, turning vaguely to face Richard.
"It is my house," said Richard.
They all discovered his presence.
"Your house, dear Richard?"
exclaimed Lady Arabel.
"Are you sure? I didn't know the Higginses had any house property on Mitten Island." "They haven't now," replied Richard. "But never mind. It has always seemed to me that there were too many houses in the world. Most houses are traps into which everything enters and out of which nothing comes. It always grieves me to see tradesmen pouring sustenance in at the back door, and no result or justification coming out of the front door. I often think that only the houses that men's bodies have deserted are really inhabited."
"It was I who burnt your house down, Richard," said Miss Ford. "But it doesn't matter. It wasn't a real house."
"You are right," said Richard. "To such as you, dear Meta, it was not a real house. It was the house of living alone, and only to people who live alone was it real. It is dark and deserted now, and levelled with the cold ground. It is as though it were a tent, being moved from its position to follow the fortunes of those dwellers alone who wander continually in silence up and down the world." He looked at Sarah Brown.
"Talking of wandering," said Miss Ford, "we are all going to America, Richard. Can you get us passports?"
"Certainly," agreed Richard. "To America, eh? A nice little trip for you all. America, you know, would be entirely magic if it weren't for the Americans."
"I have quite a circle of friends in New York," said Miss Ford, who seemed to be recovering from her nerve storm.
"Beware," said Richard, "lest you all forget the magic of tonight and change from adventurers to tourists."
"I am not going to America," said Lady Arabel. "I am going home. I never heard such dreadful nonsense. I was only in fun when I agreed to the plan."
"I never agreed to the plan at all," said Mr. Frere. "I shall be truly thankful to get to bed, and wake up tomorrow sober. I will never go out to tea in Kensington again if this is the result." "I am going to America," said Mr. Tovey, fixing his innocent eyes, obscured by hair, upon Miss Ford. "I am going to America," echoed the unseen Mayor from an unexpected direction. Nobody had yet dared to tell him of the misfortune that had overtaken him. "I'll give up this mayor job tomorrow. Catch me staying behind if... Oh, by the way, that reminds me."
"I didn't need reminding," interrupted Sarah Brown. "It seems to me that everybody has forgotten why they came here. Please, Richard, do you know of a spell to find a missing person?"
"Yes, several," answered Richard, who was always as eager as a travelling salesman to recommend his wares. "There is an awfully ingenious little spell I can show you, if you happen to have a telephone book and a compass and a toad's heart and a hair from a black goat's beard about you. Or again, if you stand on a sea beach at low tide on Christmas night with the moon at your back and a wax candle in your left hand, and write upon the sand the name... By the way, who is it you want to find?"
"The witch," answered Sarah Brown.
Richard's face fell. "Oh, only the witch?" he said. "I can tell you where she is without any spell at all. She's with my true love at Higgins Farm, helping... Oh, by the way, mother, I forgot to tell you. You are a grandmother."
"Richard!"
said Lady Arabel. She sat down suddenly on the smooth grass slope between the road and the garden hedge.
"Ah, it is too cruel!"
she cried, burying her face in her hands.
"It is too cruel! Is this my son? I meant so well, and all my life I did the things that other people did, the natural things, except just once. And for that once I am so cruelly punished. I'm given a son who is no son to me, who says only things I mustn't understand, who does only things I mustn't see."
She paused, and taking her hands from her face, looked round aghast at Richard, who was sitting beside her on the bank, stroking her arm.
"A fairy son,"
she added in a terrified whisper, and then broke out again crying.
"Ah, it is too cruel!"
Richard continued to stroke her arm without comprehension. "Yes, mother, and Peony, my true love, insists on calling him Elbert," he said. "Mother, listen, Elbert, your fairy grandson—" But Lady Arabel still sobbed. End of chapter 9.